Well, good afternoon, everyone, again, and welcome to this afternoon's Faculty and Staff Town Hall with President Fred Postello and a panel of university leaders who have been actively working this summer on preparations for the August 17th start of the semester. At this time, I'd ask all of our panelists to turn on their video before we do introductions. My name is Jeff Fowler. I'm the university's Vice President for Marketing and Communications. On the panel with Dr. Postello are Interim Provost Dr. Michael Lewis, Vice President for Facilities Management, Michael Lucido, Interim Vice President for Student Development, Dr. Deborah Lowy, Vice President for Human Resources, Mickey Luna, Associate Dean and Professor of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, Dr. Terry Redmond, Vice President for Diversity and Community Engagement, Dr. Jonathan Smith, Staff Advisory Committee Chair Sue Stevens, and Faculty Senate President and President-elect Drs. Ruth Evans and Terry Tomasik. Before we begin, a couple of reminders. This town hall will run approximately 1 hour. I want to remind you there will be a second town hall next Monday, August 10th, from 4:30 to 5:30, and we will share a registration link for that town hall soon. This town hall is being recorded today and will be posted online for those who would like to watch it again or for those who could not join us today. Our panel will be answering many of the questions that have been submitted ahead of time via the online form. Please note that we have turned off the chat function for this live stream for security purposes. If you have not yet submitted a question and you'd like to, you may still do so by clicking the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen and typing in your question. We have staff who are monitoring the Q&A as we speak, so you can present your question to the panelists, time permitting. Thank you. And now I'd like to begin by turning it over to Dr. Postello for his opening remarks. He will be followed by Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler, and thank all of you for being here this afternoon on this virtual meeting. Obviously, I would prefer, I assume we would all prefer, to be meeting face-to-face, to be actually seeing each other in a room, but as you know, that's not feasible at this point in time. These are very challenging times. I don't need to tell you that, you all know that. These past several months have been difficult for every one of us, more for some than for others. I do not need to review the physical health, the mental health, the economic, and the related consequences of this pandemic. And we're really dealing with intersecting crises because on top of that, we've continued to witness the loss of life and the crushing pain members of certain minority groups have suffered as a result of racism and racist structures. But this is the environment in which we currently find ourselves. It is not the first time, however, that this university, this region, our nation, and the world has faced a crisis of this magnitude. It is exactly in moments like these that heroes emerge, that some organizations and even entire nations stand out and stand above others in how they respond to the adversity of the times. This is a critical moment for SLU. As for each of the many crises this university has faced in its long history, we, the current members of this university, must decide individually and collectively how we are going to proceed. Historians will look back on this crisis and pass judgment on us. We must decide how we are going to move forward for the good of our university, its members, our partners, and the region. Today, in this virtual meeting, we will focus on one of the most critical sets of decisions before us, how we will begin the fall term. One that will certainly be like no other. This summer, I reflected on our decisions and decision-making, what we've been doing since the spring. I believe that we made good, inclusive decisions, decisions that were informed and nuanced. Back in March, some schools shut down and pivoted quickly with little or no consultation or notice. Here at SLU, we listen to our students and our faculty and our staff. We gave considerable space to transition in the residence halls and to online instruction, 12 days. And we kept more than 200 students on campus through the end of the term, because for a variety of reasons, they needed to stay here at SLU. We listened to our stakeholders, and whenever possible, we were flexible. So this fall, we will operate as we did last spring. We will be guided by our mission and values. We will put our patients and our students first. We will keep the implications for our people in mind, particularly the lowest compensated among us. We will think about both the short and long-term interests of the university. We will consult with experts and make informed decisions based on sound science and data. Now, this spring we witnessed what we have long argued here at St. Louis University, that for our students, in-person learning is of enormous intellectual and emotional value compared to learning entirely online back at home. This was of particular significance to our first generation students, was of particular significance for our students who come from rural communities. And it was of particular significance to students who found that their responsibilities to siblings and parents at home encumbered their ability to do their coursework. We have heard from both faculty and students that on campus is the best mode of teaching and learning. We have heard from our researchers and scientists who depend upon labs that their research suffered greatly when we closed campus and they were prevented from coming to work. In terms of advancing knowledge across these areas, on campus is essential. And we heard from our patients, many of whom required treatment which can't be done remotely, and who in the past couple of months have returned to our practice in large numbers. Much of our patient care necessitates in-person contact, not the least of which is surgery and other invasive procedures. For those patients, direct contact with our clinicians is absolutely required. So I have spent the past couple of weeks asking physicians and public health professionals, what are their views of the data? What are their views on our plans to reopen? Some professionals place no faith in our students to behave responsibly. They are concerned about us reopening. Others, including the region's pandemic task force leader and former SLU faculty member, Dr. Alex Garza, believe that it is not unreasonable to bring students back to campus with appropriate restrictions and protocols. These would include face masks, social distancing, quarantine and isolation housing, and testing. Now, we are approaching this fall as we approach the spring, listening to our people and being flexible. And we have a public health plan in place to begin our fall term on campus on August 17th. We have had and will have positive COVID cases, but we can contain those positive cases and prevent the virus's spread if we are all wearing masks, staying 6 feet apart, frequently washing and sanitizing our hands, following the appropriate protocols. As we prepare to bring staff and faculty back to campus, our goal is to keep the number of academic and operational employees who are on campus to a minimum. Certainly, we have to account for faculty who are delivering face-to-face instruction and those who are required to be on campus for additional support. Now, because of the nature of their work, most of our SLU Care employees will have to be on campus or in a hospital at which we practice most or all of the time. Our goal for such employees is to provide a work environment that minimizes the risk of contracting the virus. The nature of the precautions in that environment will vary depending upon the area in which the clinician works. Thankfully, our precautions have paid off. We've kept the number of infections among our clinicians, many of whom work directly with COVID-positive patients, low. Managers and chairs are encouraged to work together with faculty and staff to find creative, workable solutions for those who need them. Flexibility is the key to managing our way through this fall, as are grace and understanding. We will go into further detail on many of these topics over the course of this hour. I now ask Interim Provost Mike Lewis to share his opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you, President Pistello. I know everyone wants to get to the question and answer part, so let me be brief. I wanted to thank everyone for everything you've done this past spring, all the effort you've put in this summer to prepare for the fall, and of course, all the effort you're gonna put in the coming semester. I've been in front of the Board of Trustees Executive Committee and the full board this summer, which is not the norm. Both times I've led with the fact that fewer than 100 faculty had participated in a Reinhardt Center online workshop prior to March of this year. And since COVID began in March, we're over 600 faculty. And I think that's just an extraordinary commitment. The work the faculty and staff have put in since the beginning of this pandemic is impressive. Rethinking classroom assignments so we can social distance, being creative with teaching modality, for instance, AB alternating face-to-face online classes to de-densify the campus, making sure rooms we normally do not use for teaching can be used for such purposes. The efforts put into housing and residential life, testing, contact tracing, I could go on, it's been an incredible lift. We certainly still have work to do, but I think we're in a good place to open the campus next week for students to return in the following week for classes to begin. I've been working with President Pistello's office on a campus Travis policy that'll be out soon. That's one thing left I know I'd like to do. Should be no surprise, we'll be quite restrictive on university-sponsored travel for public health purposes. Working with Faculty Senate, we have two more, I think, syllabus statements to finish, one on attendance and one on distance education etiquette. The syllabus policy we've already worked on, and that is posted if you're looking for that. We're looking into possibilities to expand our testing approach such that we can test more than simply those who are symptomatic. We hope to have more information about that soon. Again, the faculty and staff have not stopped working to make sure we can open in the safest possible manner and offer our students the best education information opportunity possible. That's our mission. Let me close by recognizing the issue of racial justice and equity that has risen in the national conscience during this pandemic. I know that is not the primary topic of this town hall, but in addition to the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, COVID has laid bare the issues of racial justice and equity. I want to say that we need to do better, and that starts with taking care of our own house. If you haven't read the Harvard Business Review article by our colleagues, Kara Banks and Richard Harvey, I encourage you to do so. I also encourage you to read the post at the African American Studies website that Professor Tinson posted for the SLU community in the days following George Floyd's death. We need to work to diversify our campus. That includes faculty, staff, grad students, undergrads. I'm confident we're going to get through COVID. I'm confident we're going to come out stronger on the other side of this. When that happens, I want to make sure we are working hard to address racial justice and equity issues, not just outside of the SLU community, but internal as well. Thanks for everything you're all doing, and turn it back over to Jeff.
Thank you, Dr. Pistello and Dr. Lewis. At this time, before we start, we jump into the questions, I'd like to ask Dr. Terry Redmond to give us an overview of some of the critical things that have been done over the course of the last several months to prepare us for the start of the fall semester, including our relationship and our going over our plans with city and regional health officials.
Thank you. Yes, so SLU has developed a very comprehensive plan for reopening for this fall, and even for our reopening that occurred over the summer semester. There are multiple protective measures that are in place to create as safe a safe as campus as possible. And I'm sure that you've all seen that list, and it's also on the SLU website. What you probably haven't seen is all the work that's happened behind the scenes to develop this very comprehensive plan. This involved a multidisciplinary team of individuals from across our campus that includes SLU leaders, faculty, staff, and student representatives as well, to make sure that we were really addressing everyone's needs in developing this very comprehensive plan. The combination of measures that we have put together should significantly decrease the risk of disease transmission on campus. Our plans were all developed based on CDC, WHO guidelines, public health official guidelines from both city and county in St. Louis regionally, current research, and in addition, we have partnered very closely with the St. Louis City Health Department, including having Dr. Eccles come to our campus and take a tour of our on-campus housing to help us make decisions about what sort of capacity we can safely house students for this upcoming fall. In addition, he has seen other aspects of our plan, including our student athletics plan, and we have run multiple questions past him if there were, for some issues that maybe don't have strong evidence behind them, or there's conflicting information provided by CDC and other health officials. So I am very confident that we do have a very good plan to create a very safe campus this fall, and I'm looking forward to reopening campus very soon. I would like to take a quick second to thank everyone that's been involved in these planning measures to help SLU reopen safely. And then lastly, thank all of you for your patience as we have worked through these plans and development. And please know some of the plans, including our testing plan, are fluid. As things are changing locally and regionally, our plans will change to reflect current information and current science.
Thank you, Dr. Redmond. So now we'll begin with the most asked question that came in through our Google form by those who registered for today's event. What are the deciding factors that would cause us to change course and pivot back to online instruction as we did in the spring?
So let me start, Jeff, and then I'll ask others to chime in, since I'm the one ultimately who would make that decision. I think we would operate in the fall exactly as we operated in the spring. When we started to grasp the seriousness of the disease and how it was beginning to spread, and based on what was known at the time, we started meeting more frequently and in a larger group. Starting the week of spring break, we stopped meeting as a cabinet and we started meeting as an enhanced ULC, about 45 of us. We were meeting face-to-face at that week, and we just started gathering data, listening to experts, trying to assess what was happening and what was in the best interest of our community. So I don't think that we're setting a number. Well, if X number of people get the virus, or if there's X number of hospitalizations in advance, we will monitor this daily, certainly weekly and so forth. Listen to what the experts are telling us, in whom we're constantly speaking, and make decisions as a leadership team based on the best science and advice that we have at the time. So we go into this fall knowing that we have to be constantly keeping up on what the trends are on our campus, in our region, and beyond, listening to what the experts are advising, and making decisions appropriately. So there's not, a set of guidelines. If X, then, if X, this variable hits X, we're done. Further, I would imagine that much like the spring, we're going to keep some number of students on campus through the entire term. And we'll go through the same process then if we decide to restrict even further the number of students on campus based on what their needs in particular situations are. So we will continue to be flexible, we'll continue to be informed, we'll continue to make decisions as a group based on what we think is in the best interest of our stakeholders. So Debbie, would you like to add anything to that?
I'm mindful that we'll keep an eye on it. Might not feel as satisfying as folks really want, and so I think Terry and to say the set of combination of factors that we would be keeping our eyes on. What I think is helpful to think about is what would it mean if 20 students were sick on campus and no other red flags were raging, versus 20 students are sick on campus, we have 200 conduct violations in the hopper because students won't comply, we see staff and faculty getting sick, the region has cases. That number of 20 doesn't mean the same thing in one context that it means in another. And so I think just to really think about the different levers that we would be looking at, and to understand what the set of conditions are. I don't know if, Terry, are there other things you would add besides the ones that Fred and I have mentioned?
I mean, there are a number of data points that we would be looking at: the percentage of positive cases, percentage that are testing positive of those that we are testing, if we're able to have adequate isolation and quarantine spaces for students on campus. And one of the most important factors that we will be looking at is healthcare surge capacity regionally. If healthcare surge capacity becomes exceeded in the St. Louis region, then we would not want to contribute to that by having a large number of infected individuals on our campus, because that might lead to an increased mortality rate. And of course, that would not be in line with SLU's values. So we'll be keeping a close eye on what's happening regionally with the healthcare system, as well as what's happening on campus.
Okay, thank you all. And I do want to mention that this question has been added to the frequently asked questions on the Back to SLU website, and we will be adding more as your questions come in. Another common question we've seen that has been submitted: can we talk a little more about our plan to test students, faculty, and staff for COVID-19? Some have asked whether we will test students before they move in. We have also seen questions about wastewater testing and spot testing over the course of the semester.
Again, I'd like to start, and then I'm going to turn it over to Terry, who knows much more detail about this. It is our intention to test every incoming residential student. So we're working with a lab now. We have not yet finalized the contract. We hope that we're able to work this out where they could do a test in sufficient numbers so that we could test the entire incoming residential population and get a quick turnaround, and then act accordingly based on that knowledge with those students, assuming some do show up positive. Then beyond that, it is our intention to test more broadly throughout the term, but I'll let Terry get into more of the specifics.
Thanks. So as Dr. Pacello said, our plan, our hope is to be able to do testing of all of our on-campus students when they arrive on campus, with the caveat that we have been told that there is, not just regionally, but also nationally, a shortage of the test kits. So if the company that we are working with is unable to provide adequate test kits to do that testing, then of course, we would only be able to do as much testing as they have test kits available for us. But our hope is to be able to test all of those incoming students that are living in on-campus housing. And if we have additional tests, to be able to offer that for students that are living off campus as well. Moving forward, we are also considering some potential ongoing testing, such as some pooled testing. We are still working out the details of that plan in terms of how much testing capacity is available to us and what plan is going to make the most sense for us based on our initial data that we collect with the on-campus students that we collect when they first move in, and also based on what's happening regionally. I think one of the most important messages to keep in mind about our testing plan is that our testing plan is very fluid, because it is based on test availability, which is changing on an almost daily basis, and the resources available to us to do that testing. So we will keep you informed as changes to the testing plan change moving forward.
Could I just add a note to that? If you are a SLU employee and also the parent of a Billiken moving in next week to on-campus living, we know there will be questions that if we can follow through on this plan to test on-campus students before they move into residential spaces, That's in a few days. We know there will be questions about the impact of that to our move-in schedule. We ask you not to ask the residence life team those questions yet because we're working through the final details of that, so they won't be able to tell you. I just thought for the Billiken parents in the group, it might be useful to know. We know there will be an implication for move-in, and we're working on.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question we've received a few times in a few different variations. Why is it prudent to have in-person classes now when cases in Missouri and the US are much higher and have been rising daily, such as they did in March when we moved to all online in the spring?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll kick it to Terry and Mike and others. The situation today versus the spring is very different. In the spring, relatively little was known about this disease, how to treat it. There was enormous concern when we decided to go entirely to online learning and to get almost all of our students off campus, that we were on track to overwhelm our healthcare system's capacity to deal with this. And that was not just simply here in the region, but well beyond. I'm using one example. So I was in regular conversations with leaders of area hospitals, other public health officials who said, we've got to move quickly, we've got to move rapidly, we've got to move rather severely, or we will overwhelm our system and it will be a complete nightmare. We won't be able to house people. We were talking about, and I was in conversations with others, where can we find space so we could set up hospitals, large spaces. We were talking to people about large spaces on our campus. So it was a very different situation then than now. We still have the disease, obviously. The spread is more than it was when we made that decision, but we know more. And again, we're relying on expert advice to guide us in our decisions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Terry and then Mike.
So those are all great points, and I'll just add a little bit to that. So now that we know more about how this disease is spread, of course, there are still some things that scientists and researchers are still trying to figure out, and new science is being released every day. But based on what we know today, this disease is primarily spread by respiratory droplets when you have very close contact for prolonged periods of time when you're not wearing masks. That information was not available to us in the spring, and so mask use was not widely used to the general public in the spring. Now we have great epidemiological data that shows us that when we do have individuals, everyone's wearing a mask, trying to keep 6 feet of distance as much as possible, and being diligent about hand hygiene, that we see very limited community spread in those sorts of situations. Based on that, that provides good evidence that we should be able to reopen campus safely, assuming that students, staff, and faculty are all following the procedures correctly and maintaining social distance, performing hand hygiene, and wearing their masks, especially when they have to be within close proximity to one another.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to that. We didn't know what we were dealing with in the spring, and we did what we had to do for the safety of our community. And we've spent the last, I guess, 5 months about learning, heeding the advice of experts, and developing policies that can make it safe for us to return to campus. And so that's where we are right now. We think we have the policies and approaches to safely return to campus. This is it's not going to be like it normally is. Obviously, we don't know how long this is going to go on. I certainly hear and understand the anxiety behind wanting to stay away until we have a vaccine. And I believe that that's where this is coming from. The belief or the opinion that we should not have we left in March because we were going to wait for a vaccine, and everything that I read, and I'm sure you read, makes it sound like we're close to a vaccine. I think we've all seen other viruses come and go, and there's still not a vaccine, right? We don't have a vaccine for AIDS. We don't have a vaccine for SARS. So we're doing, we've worked hard to understand this. As Terry said, we're in a place where we think we have enough understanding that we can develop policies to make this safe. And so we think that the best, as Fred said at the beginning, our students, they value education face-to-face. They value the formation they get face-to-face. That's the mission of our university, and we think we can deliver that in a safe manner.
I just want to add one small point. We've talked a little bit about the scientific data related to COVID that we have today that we didn't have in March. We have another set of data that seems equally important for our campus to think about, which is we now know something we didn't know in March, which is how much inequity we level when we bring our students to campus, and how much those inequities get exacerbated when we send them away to try to do the thing that we do from a distance. And so when I think about the countless numbers of students who did not know to ask for a housing exception or were not in a position to stay on campus this past spring, and the difficulties, indeed in some cases damage, those students had to live through, from food insecurity to emotional trauma to care for siblings, to all the things that Fred mentioned, including something simple like lack of access to broadband that would allow them to be successful in their courses. I think the data we have about that is that they are on a more level playing field if we can bring them into our community than they are if we have to be dispersed.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment? Okay, we've got a live question that has come in. Will there be daily symptom checks required for students, faculty, and staff?
Go ahead, Terry, you can.
Yes, so one of the many protective measures that we have in place is that we will be doing daily health screenings of anyone that will be coming to campus, including employees, students, and visitors. We're still working out the details of exactly which app we are going to use to collect that information, but at a minimum, we will be collecting temperature and symptoms on a daily basis. And individuals that have a symptom of COVID-19 or have a fever will be referred either to employee health or student health in order to be evaluated by a medical professional to decide if they need to be tested.
Okay, Terry, thank you very much. As a follow-up to that, is there going to be a testing protocol for faculty and staff? If so, what is that process and what would it cost? Terry, I go to you again.
We don't currently have a plan for asymptomatic testing of employees. We do offer symptomatic for employees that are symptomatic. You may go to employee health, and if employee health medical professionals believe that you are at risk of having COVID-19, then they will do testing in their office. But as I said before, all of our testing plans are fluid based on what's available in terms of test access and other issues. So that could change moving forward.
All right, thank you. Back to the questions that were submitted before we started here. Who do faculty and staff members contact for guidance regarding the need to quarantine due to a potential exposure? For example, if my child is required to quarantine for 2 weeks because someone in their class tested positive, as their parent, am I now required to quarantine? I would assume yes. And what needs to be reported to the university?
So decisions about isolation and quarantine will be made in conjunction with employee health and student health, depending on whether it's an employee or a student. And then also we are developing an internal contact tracing plan that is being coordinated with the city health department. but we are developing our own contact tracing team so that we can act very quickly when we have known or suspected individuals with COVID-19. So we'll be able to determine who those individuals are that have had a suspected exposure to somebody who is positive, and then recommendations will be made about quarantine at that time.
Jeff, I would just add, if you look at the SLU COVID webpage too, we do encourage employees, faculty, and staff who have a concern that they have been exposed or they have a question to reach out to employee health for guidance. So that would be where we would direct people.
Dr. Evans.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something because Terry mentioned faculty and mentioned students and staff, but I know that faculty are very anxious about what happens if somebody, tests positive and they've been in contact with them. And they know that they have to contact employee health because that's on the FAQs. But there isn't anything there that says, should they then automatically quarantine themselves, or is it that they have to wait to get some kind of direction from employee health? That's not clear.
So you should wait to receive information saying that you are a known contact. So one thing to keep in mind is that the definition of an exposure is that you have had prolonged close contact with an infected individual while they were contagious and the two of you were not wearing masks. So given our current policies that we have in place, including mask use and social distancing in the classroom, class experiences would not constitute exposures for other students or the faculty that are in those classes. So if a student in Bio 101 tests positive, the other students and the instructor for that class are not necessarily going to be considered contacts and need to quarantine unless they've had an outside exposure to that infected individual. And those decisions will be made by our contact tracing team based on our definitions of what constitutes an exposure and what kinds of contact they have had with other individuals since they became contagious.
Anyone else on the panel? Okay, this next question I believe is for Debbie Lowy. It comes from a staff member. How does having housing at nearly full capacity adhere to our mission of support for the whole person, especially in dorms with community bathrooms?
Yeah, happy to get this question. It's not an uncommon kind of question to get. I think a few things I would say in response to that. One is to go back to the point I was making earlier and that several of us have made. When you look at the kinds of inequities that our students experienced when they left, care for their whole person might in fact require us to bring them back to campus, where they have a counselor they can continue to be treated by, where they have disability services support on site, where they have access to Wi-Fi, food, et cetera. So the whole person perspective is one reason it was important to us to bring students back. So that's a piece I want to share. I know that the concept of housing is, I want to say housing is not a single thing. And so we have many different styles of housing facilities and different combinations of students in those facilities. And so one of the really important questions for us started the day we sent students home in the spring, which is it safe to bring students into residential living, congregate housing? If so, what are the conditions in which we need to do that? Terry referenced earlier that we had Dr. Eccles from the City Health Department come to campus, walk through our residential buildings and facilities. And he gave a lot of input and guidance and a lot of feedback on our plans. He was, right? Doubles, 2 students living, even in a room where they can't be more than 6 feet apart all the time. He was not concerned about that. I think by and large, our public health colleagues have not been concerned about that. In the same way that you live with people in your house who become your family unit, right? Roommates will become family units inside the residence halls. When we think about Terry's definition of exposure, not Terry's definition, our scientific definition of exposure, to be clear, that prolonged exposure, I think, Terry, as we've been talking about it in our residence hall conversations, 15 minutes or more of maskless, closer than 6 feet proximity. Aside from the rooms that students live in, there aren't many spaces in our residence halls where they're going to have that kind of exposure. So when we think about those community bathrooms, they're not usually, they're not usually together in the shower or the bathroom. Please, likely to expose them. Is there risk? Of course, there is risk to leaving your house. Sorry, am I on? I'm getting a message. Okay, thanks. So I think that was a factor for us. When we think about those communal bathrooms, no one was more skeptical of communal bathrooms in the beginning of this journey than I was. You can ask all the people on this call. And then what I learned is, the potential exposure in those bathroom spaces is low, and they'll be professionally cleaned. I'm not sure we can say that about the bathrooms in their suites necessarily. Certainly won't say that for their bathrooms in their off-campus apartments, right? We want them to do that work, but where two people share a bathroom space, there's greater personal responsibility for that space. Where multiple people share a bathroom space, we have Michael Lucito's fantastic team thinking very carefully about how to ensure safe cleaning and sanitizing. And then the last thing I want to say is, what were the alternatives to bringing most of our residential students back? Not bringing most of our residential students back. Some institutions have had to think about only to bring first-year students. Some places are bringing first-year students in the fall and second-year students in the spring, right? Our goal was to be able to invite back to campus all of our students, to have them accept that invitation, to agree to live by the expectations that we've set. And from my perspective in the housing context, to have them living inside the SLU ecosystem seems more of them in our ecosystem where we have more rules and de-densification and mask policies in place felt better to me than trying to move to all singles, pushing more than 1,000 students into the local St. Louis housing community, where they are going to encounter landlords and building owners who don't care a whit about mask policies and de-densification. And so my goal was to really think about how to bring those students into community and how to do that as safe as we can, as Terry said. And then finally, I just want to say mental health is a part of what I think about in caring for these whole persons. And we have heard a lot from our students who have been in singles only last spring that it was very, very challenging to be alone most of the time. And so I think we're weighing all of those things when we think about the decisions for housing. Terry, I'm sure you have some science-minded things to say that would be even more persuasive.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. When we first started thinking about our plans for on-campus housing for fall, one of our primary concerns potentially was the communal bathroom issue. When we look at the science tells us that this is primarily spread by respiratory droplets. There's this small theoretical risk that a contaminated environment might play a role in disease transmission, but we don't have any strong epidemiological studies that definitely point to a contaminated environment as being the source of infection. So given that information, we took that into consideration and said, so how much of a risk would these communal bathrooms play potentially in disease transmission? In addition, when Dr. Eccles was on campus, when we walked him through on-campus housing, we took him to floors that had communal bathrooms and specifically asked him, how do you feel about having these students on this number of students on this floor all sharing this bathroom? And he did not express any concerns, and he fully supported our decision to keep open the dorms and on-campus housing that had communal bathrooms.
We've had a live follow-up question to this discussion that has just been taking place. It is, what % of our residential students are returning? What will the percentage occupancy be in our facilities?
I'm happy to speak to that. So once we made a decision about the housing model, we had to go and rework housing assignments. Keep in mind that juniors, seniors, and sophomores had already been given housing assignments, and we had to pull some move things around. So once we started to look at that and to think about how much isolation and quarantine space was appropriate for us to set aside, we assigned housing at a reduction of just over 10%. I can tell you that with, we also allowed students to have greater flexibility to opt out of their housing contract for this fall if they have health reasons, if they decided to learn remotely and not come back to campus at all, if they decided they really needed to be in a single off campus, that was their choice, right? Giving students agency, and thinking about the number of students who have opted out of housing and or are opting out of an on-ground experience, I think we will settle at a reduction of around 13 to 14% of what, from the housing stock we could fill to the number of students we have in housing facilities. So I think that may or may not be helpful information. Again, I would just remind us that the percentage, while useful in some ways, is less useful than what are the combination of structures of our residential facilities and how have we chosen to combine students in those spaces.
Thank you, Debbie. Childcare has been the subject of a number of questions. Childcare is a difficult issue for many faculty and staff, especially as so many school districts are starting virtual. How is SLU accommodating the needs of employees who are parents? Some schools talk about stopping the tenure clock, for example. Are there any specific plans regarding setting up a formal daycare center?
So sure, I'll start and let Mike cover all the things that I miss. I want to echo some of the comments that were made earlier and thank all of our incredible faculty and staff who over the last several months have risen to the occasion of responding to really the challenges, the incredible challenges everybody that the pandemic has created. So our people have really done an extraordinary job of caring for our patients and students and planning for this return, first to the clinics to treat our patients and then now for our students returning to campus. So much planning and then replanning and then circumstances change and reworking those plans. And all of that, really doing that while trying to figure out how to navigate challenges at home that may come from childcare issues. So the resilience that our people have shown is really inspiring. We are really closely monitoring currently the recent announcement of several school districts to move to online learning. And we're working to understand the ripple effect on our workforce, particularly those essential employees who must come into work. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have worked very hard to accommodate the needs of our employees and will continue to do so. We've offered flexibility to our faculty for allowing additional online learning. And we have identified resources which can be found at the One SLU webpage that offer other places people can go to seek assistance with childcare issues. Many of those things don't address the real issue that we're encountering right now, which is when 30 or 40% of the school districts decide in the last couple of weeks that they will begin the school year online. So that really changes so much, and really no employer necessarily has a plan to address that. Our plan and the way we are addressing it for now is we are going to continue to communicate to our leaders really the need to show extreme trust and flexibility to our faculty and staff. We have allowed non-essential employees to continue working from home throughout this period, which we know has been a tremendous benefit to many of our people. We've granted employees additional sick leave on top of our current generous leave policies that were already in place to provide income support to employees who have been unable to work. And as the return to work guide that was issued yesterday communicated, we intend to continue the approach of maximizing remote work and coming up with creative, flexible approaches to accommodating people's needs. However, as we all know, particularly our essential employees who have continued to come to work or will be returning to work, there is some work that simply cannot be accomplished remotely. Treating our patients in most cases requires people present to screen, welcome, and be physically with our patients. With students returning to campus, we must have people here to care for our students, to provide them the education, housing, and food for which they are paying the university to deliver. The delivery of these services is not only our response to the call of our mission, but it generates the revenue that pays the salaries of our hardworking faculty and staff and keeps our people employed during this period of uncertainty. So our ability to continue delivering these services for both reasons is very important. For our essential employees who are not able to work from home, who have children doing online learning or have lost access to childcare, we are encouraging all of our units to do everything that they can do to accommodate those needs. We know of many places already where units are working through that, finding creative solutions to accommodate the needs of people. Co-workers and supervisors are covering for colleagues. Essential employees are making sacrifices and working with family and friends to provide childcare support. We know there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to this. There is not a universal solution to the issue, as we learned this also by talking with other employers. We're really providing agency to the departments and supervisors to determine the best way to navigate these issues. It is going to require extreme creativity, trust, and good faith, as well as grace to get through it. When we think about our leaders and faculty and staff, we're going to need to find creative ways where we still accommodate the needs of our people. So that's going to require trust in that everyone's acting in good faith. There will be instances where people will have to cover for other people, and people are going to have to trust their colleagues in those situations. The supervisors are going to have to do as much as they can to accommodate people. And when an exception occurs, people need to trust that they will be covered and that they will cover for others when those needs arise. And that's really the essential or the key way for us to get through much of this. There is no playbook for a pandemic, not in today's society. So for the next few months, we're going to have to work together to figure that out.
Mike Lewis, would you like to?
Yeah, I can address the faculty and maybe also say a word about the academic affairs staff. So with the faculty, we asked this question or a question on this topic in the survey we sent out in June. And of course, at that point, none of the K through 12 schools had articulated their plans, and so it was a generic question about might childcare be an issue for you. We shared that information with the appropriate chairs and deans and encouraged them to be flexible with faculty who had these concerns should that in fact become a concern. As Mickey just noted, in the last week or two, we have heard the plans, I think, from all the schools. I mean, I know with my 14-year-old, not only have I heard the plans, they've already changed multiple times. So it's definitely a moving target. And the message is still the same. I've been encouraging deans and chairs to work with the faculty who are affected. A message will go out today from my office, again, making this statement. And what does that mean for faculty? I think if you need to reschedule your class to work at a time that's more convenient so that you can stay home with your child, I think we should do that. If you need to move it online, I think we should do that. I think we need to be as flexible as possible, and that's the encouragement to deans and chairs to work with their faculty on this issue. And really for the academic affairs staff, it's what Mickey said. The encouragement is for the supervisors to work with individuals to be as flexible as possible, given the work that has to be done. Again, this is a time for grace and flexibility and us to live our mission. I know that part of the question you had, Jeff, was daycare, and if President Pastillo doesn't mind, I'm gonna give that part to him.
Yeah, and then I'll also share with Mickey, it's impossible for us to set up a daycare center on campus at this time. I've been involved in the past in standing up a center, and it takes a year or more to go through all of the hurdles, regulatory requirements, petitions, and so forth to do that. We just can't say we're going to set up a child care center. We would violate a slew of laws. So that we simply can't do. Further beyond that, it's also a challenge in terms of those centers which do exist, how many are going to continue to operate moving forward because of the challenges that are presented here with this virus. So I think what we've got to do is what Mickey said, which is be as creative and flexible as we can be with our people. Try to be as understanding as we can, those department chairs and managers, with your faculty and staff who are facing these challenges. Can a faculty member teach a course in the evening or on weekends if he or she can't do it during the day? Or can we change course times to account? We've got to be as flexible, as accommodating, and as supportive of each other as we possibly can be. Understanding each other's needs and circumstances is critical to help us get through this. And I think Mickey went through it very well. Thanks.
Dr. Costello, we are about 5 minutes away from the 1 hour mark. We still have some questions left. Would you like to continue on with questions for a while longer, or do we want to stop at the 1 hour mark?
Why don't we say we'll just go a couple, maybe 2 more questions, Jeff, and then I'd like to say some summary comments, realizing I want to respect people's time. We've got next Monday to pick up questions that didn't get asked today or new questions that arise. So maybe a couple more questions and then summary comments. And
okay, that's great. This one for Michael Lucido from a staff member who says she will mostly be working from home this fall, but have to come in from time to time to pick up mail. Is there an option for such cases where paying for parking pass might not make sense if you're only on campus for 15 minutes or so each week?
Thanks, Jeff. There's a few options. The first one is if you go out to the parking card service website and look at our parking maps, there are probably 20 to 30 different loading zones across the north and south campus. You can use one of those loading zones for up to 30 minutes, which would allow you the opportunity to run into the office. They're sporadic throughout the campuses. There are some that you cannot get to, we recognize, without a parking pass, but there are plenty of options that you can get to without parking passes. The other option is you can use any of the garages, the Hickory garages, Olive Compton, or the Laclede garage. Pull a ticket, and if you were there under 30 minutes or less, then there is no charge to that ticket. So as long as you're 30 minutes or less, there's no charge. Other than that, if you go beyond an hour, it's $2 an hour. And then there's also lots of street parking that is available around campus.
Michael, stay with us. Leave your mic up, if you will. This one is for you and Debbie Lowy that came in live. If a student has an in-person class and a synchronous online class back-to-back, will there be spaces on campus, both ends, north and south, where they can hunker down and participate in their course?
You or me, Michael?
Okay. So the short answer is yes. We are still working to identify those spaces. We know that we have excess spaces, classrooms or conference rooms that will not be used for instruction this fall. And so we are working in conjunction with the registrar's office and Debbie's team to identify what those spaces are and make sure that they're put to use for various different purposes. And one of those is that.
I would just add to that, dining, studying with people who don't live in your residence hall, might not live on campus, working on online courses. Students need space for all those things, spread out space. And it will be even more important that we limit the other kinds of in-person events, activities, meetings, et cetera, on campus, because we will need all the space that we can get to make sure that students do what we want them to do. If we don't designate spaces for them, they're going to do things we don't want to see them do.
Okay, thank you. We'll make this our final question. What do I do if I am supposed to teach in person and would like to discuss switching to teaching online?
So that's, I think clearly for me, that's also in the message that I'm be sending out today, and if it hasn't already gone out, and this is a message that I've been hearing through through the deans. I know that there are faculty who have anxiety about this, and so we want to be accommodating. And so I want you to work with your chairs and your deans. As you've heard from many of us on this panel, we feel like we've done the best possible job we can do to make this a safe environment for our faculty, staff, students, patients, as we return to campus in the coming weeks. When inside the classrooms, we think that these we've made these spaces as safe as possible with the requirement for face masks, social distancing. As you've heard, we're hoping to be able to test for non-symptomatic students. So we're not even stopping where we're at right now. We're continually working to try and make this as safe as possible for us to continue with the face-to-face education. We're doing this because we've heard our students. This is what they desire. This is the type of educational and formational experience that they're looking for. With the surveys that we've sent out to students to determine their desires, over 90% of our students are coming back for face-to-face, a face-to-face educational experience. And our hope is to be able to deliver that as much as possible. Again, I'll go back to where I start. With all that said, I understand the anxieties. And so if you're a faculty member who still has great anxieties, you'll see in the message that I put out today that I would ask you to work with your department chair or dean if that's appropriate, and we will be as the instruction to the dean and chair is to be accommodating, and we have discussed this as a group of deans.
Thank you, Mike Lewis. That will wrap up the question and answer part of our event today. There are some questions that were submitted that we didn't get to, but I want to remind you again that there is another town hall on Monday, August 10th from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. And those questions that we did not get to today, we will certainly make every effort to address at the Monday town hall. Your questions help us inform our FAQs on the Back to SLU page, and we are updating those almost daily now. So please check in frequently before you to see if there's answers to your questions that have been posted there. And now to conclude the town hall event, I will send it back to Dr. Postello.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler, for moderating this discussion this afternoon. As I said at the outset, we are in a crisis, an existential crisis for higher education, and one that's impacted healthcare as well. This is a moment where we see what people and organizations and nations are made of. I have been so impressed and I am so proud of what I have seen of my colleagues this summer, and I know that those of you I have not had a chance to observe directly have been working equally hard. Many gave up their summer vacations, have little or no vacation. We know we're dealing with the uncertain, and we know we're dealing with a situation that changes rapidly, and we have had to adjust and accommodate. We're frustrated by the limitations, the lack of supplies for testing, lack of quick turnaround in testing that we've had. And people have been trying very hard to do the best we can as we move forward, and we will continue to do so. So I want to thank each and every one of you for all you're doing in this moment, for those we serve and for our institution. And to conclude, I want to turn to Jonathan Smith, who spoke at the end of our ULC meeting yesterday. And I just thought it was an incredibly wise statement that he did. And I asked Jonathan if you wouldn't mind sharing similar sentiments with us today, and we'll end upon that note. So, Jonathan.
Thanks, Fred. And thanks also for raising the expectations. Appreciate that. I think I want to reflect, share with you a couple of things that have really been on my mind this week. And two of them came from colleagues of mine over the course of some meetings this week. And one of the first things that I just want all of us to consider and think about is the simple degree of absurdity that we live with right now. Throughout this, I was just sitting looking at the questions that are being formulated in the Q&A and the questions that came to us beforehand. I think it's unimaginable. A year ago, it would have been unimaginable for us to imagine that these are the kinds of questions that we would be having to ask ourselves. And since March of this year, every one of us on this call, every one of us has had to ask a series of questions, change our lives, do things that we could not have previously imagined before. As we sit here, you see me sitting at home in my kitchen, and a year ago, if you had told me I'd be 6 months away from my office, I would have found that unimaginable unless I were experiencing a personal health crisis. But yet here we are, and this is where all of us exist. And this is why, in the wise words of my friend and colleague Bill Johnson, who has said this a couple times this week, and you've heard it repeated throughout this session, we have to show each other maximum grace and maximum flexibility because we all have so much at stake here. And I think it's really important. I think today also about John Lewis and Martin Luther King, whose lives, whose examples let us know that one of the things that we are always striving for is this notion of beloved community. And here in the midst of a global pandemic where all of us face complete and absolute uncertainty and where we have no choice but to go on and plow ahead and do the things that we hope will keep us safe, keep our staff safe, keep our faculty safe, keep our families safe, we have to go ahead and do those things. But I really hope and pray that we can do this at this moment with the notion of continuing to become a beloved community at a moment where there are insufficient metrics, insufficient answers, insufficient certainty. We have to depend upon each other to literally and simply be community. That is all we have right now. And I hope that all of us continue to show each other, that we show our colleagues, our families, our friends, our supervisors, our employees, our neighbors, that we continue to show each other maximum grace and flexibility, and that we work every day to be a beloved community that helps bring each other. I look forward to the day when I can get back on campus and hug all of you who I haven't had the opportunity to hug since mid-March, and shake hands and share smiles and coffee with. And until we meet again, take care of yourselves. Take care of yourselves and all of those people you care for. So thanks for it. And I hope that was okay.
It was a perfect note to end on. Thank you, Jonathan.
And I'll also note that all of the attendees, it has been shared with you, the registration form for next Monday's town hall and the form to submit your any questions you'd like us to answer on August 10th. Thank you, everyone, again.